Insights.
This is Akashvani. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on rising conflict in West Asia and its global implications. The participants are R. Swaminathan, former ambassador, and Diksha Saxena, Akashvani correspondent.
The conflict in West Asia has entered into the sixth day today and has further intensified. Iran launched its 19th wave of Operation True Promise 4. The attacks are continuing and the entire region is stressed. The impact of this escalating conflict is not just restricted to the region, but also it has global implications. To talk in detail about this, we are now joined by former Ambassador R. Swaminathan. Ambassador Swaminathan, welcome to Akashvani News.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador Swaminathan, since the conflict has entered its sixth day today, can you give us a brief outlook of how the situation is unfolding?
As you know, the conflict began on 28th of February when the United States and Israel launched a coordinated attack on Iran, targeting its senior leadership and military infrastructure. On the first day, the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was killed, along with some of his family members as well as the top military leadership of Iran. Since then, as you know, more than 2,000 Iranian military targets have been attacked. The strikes include missile launch sites in Iran, naval bases, military command centers. Of course, Iran also has responded with large wave of missiles and drones, particularly on Israel, US bases in the Gulf, infrastructure in regional states, as well as attacks on tankers near the Strait of Hormuz. As for human cost so far, it has been quite high. Over 1,000 people killed in Iran, 6 US military personnel have died in Kuwait, 10 in Israel, and about 15 in total in Gulf countries. The war is, of course, no longer confined to Iran and Israel. It has now spread to Lebanon, Iraq, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and even Turkey. But another important thing is prices of oil, gas, ammonia have increased. The Strait of Hormuz carries about 20% of global oil trade and over 20% of liquid natural gas and 1/3 of ammonia, which is used for manufacturing urea. I'm sure that we'll talk about it further.
The conflict, as you mentioned, has a lot of impact on multiple things, which includes the oil and gas, as you mentioned, and also the trade. What is the current situation at the Strait of Hormuz and how is it impacting the oil supply world over?
As you know, the movement of ships across the Strait of Hormuz has completely stopped. It's, I would say, complete standstill. No ship will go to the area, as we can very well understand, because insurance premiums have rocketed. And of course, there is also this aspect of physical safety. And the result is that oil prices have already risen by 14%, gas prices as much as 70%, and ammonia by 5%. Lot of Asian economies, particularly I would say India, China, Japan, we all depend a lot on energy imports from the Gulf countries. And we will definitely face energy and security challenges if it were to continue. And in our case, we are also dependent on ammonia. And as you know, ammonia is an ingredient for making fertilizers. So that is something which would impact us also. But I hope the war ends quickly and things come back to normal.
Also, what will be the loss in terms of money if the Strait of Hormuz remains non-functional for a few more days?
Yesterday, President Trump announced that the US military would begin escorting oil and gas tankers transiting the Gulf if necessary and as soon as possible. So this is something which, whether it will happen, how quickly will it happen, it is something which we have to see. But if this were to happen, then definitely there will be some movement and there will be some ease in terms of the movement of the ships. Straits of Hormuz is one of the narrowest waterways, and in fact at its narrowest point, it's about only 35 kilometers. So if the war continues, say as Mr. President Trump has said that it will go on for 4 weeks, but that will be a very long time. And if this were to happen, there will definitely be major supply chain issues. How much will the prices increase? Will of course depend on the strategic reserves of the countries and how long the war will last. But again, as I said earlier, I hope the war comes to an end early.
1,221 flights by Indian carriers and 388 flights by foreign carriers have been cancelled due to the ongoing situation in the region, and India has operated a number of flights to bring back the stranded passengers. How hard has this war hit the aviation sector as well as the hospitality industry as a whole?
See, in fact, the impact is very, very high. And as you know, some of the countries in the Gulf region, they are transit points, hubs, basically Dubai, Abu Dhabi and various other places. And at this point of time, the air traffic situation has, I would say, almost stopped. Most of the Gulf airspace is closed or heavily restricted because, of course, as one can understand, missile attacks and military operations. And UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, and of course, Iran and Israel, they have major restrictions. In fact, since the start of the war, I think today is probably the 5th day, I think, or the 6th day, over 23,000 flights have been cancelled since the war began. So only limited operations are currently taking place. And of course, airlines are running reduced schedules, mainly for passenger evacuation. But one thing which is very, very important to notice is India is currently among the countries which is running the largest number of evacuation flights. My understanding is that Indigo and Air India operated as many as 60 special evacuation flights yesterday to bring back stranded passengers from the Gulf region. In fact, UAE, particularly Dubai, and many of the other Gulf countries have become big tourist destinations in the last many years, and because of this situation has been impacted severely, and I think it will take quite a lot of time for it to recover.
I would like to understand from you, what are the long-term implications of this conflict? How is it going to impact the region and make it more complicated in the years to come?
This is something, actually, if you really go back, when after the 12-day war that happened in June 2025, there was this message from President Trump that Iran's nuclear program was obliterated. But then, there was this massive protests in Iran in January, and then President Trump said that he drew his red lines in terms of that Iran should not kind of impact badly on the lives of the people who were protesting peacefully. But as it happened, thousands of people died. So at that point of time, of course, though President Trump said that help is on the way, that he was not able to do at that point of time because there were not enough US military assets in the region. Subsequently, as you know, 2 big aircraft carriers went and a number of things had gone. So again, if you really go back, the thing is that while it was projected in the beginning as a nuclear issue, it got expanded to reduction of missile on part of Israel, and also Israel should stop its support to the proxies in the region. So with all these additionalities, particularly insistence that Iran should not have missiles was something which was completely unacceptable to them, because that was the only insurance they had in terms of any kind of a security situation. That is why I think though there was some kind of a hope during that 3 rounds of indirect talks which took place, that things did not go well and the war has started. But in terms of the implications, you see, Iran is a very important country with a large population. How it is going to end? For example, as you know, that the Gulf countries themselves were having certain accommodation towards Iran over a period of time. And while in my view that they may weaken kind of Iran may serve their interest, but at the same time, if it is a destabilized Iran, which is going to be very, very difficult for the region, it's just across the ocean. So it is what I would call our near neighbor. If this destabilization were to happen, it is going to have a major impact.
So here I would like to also mention that Prime Minister Narendra Modi, while briefing the media today with the President of Finland, Dr. Alexander Stubb, called for a swift end to conflicts in West Asia and also in Ukraine. And he said that India has always advocated for dialogue and diplomacy. So before we progress, let's first listen to what Prime Minister Narendra Modi had to say.
Friend, भारत और फिनलैंड दोनों रूल ऑफ लॉ, डायलॉग और डिप्लोमेसी में विश्वास रखते हैं. हम एकमत है कि केवल मिलिट्री कॉन्फ्लिक्ट से किसी भी मुद्दे का समाधान नहीं निकल सकता. यूक्रेन हो या पश्चिमी एशिया, हम संघर्ष की शीघ्र समाप्ति और शांति के हर प्रयास का समर्थन करते रहेंगे. हम इस बात पर भी सहमत हैं कि बढ़ते हुए ग्लोबल चैलेंजेस के समाधान के लिए ग्लोबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस का रिफॉर्म आवश्यक ही नहीं, अर्जेंट भी है.
Ambassador Swaminathan, how do you see this particular call of Prime Minister and the statement of Prime Minister in the times of global turmoil?
Ours is, I would say, is the very wise policy. See, because if you see, will this war, which is happening, in fact, we just spoke about what kind of an impact the war can have. Will it solve the issue? No. It will actually create more issues. Just look at, what happened, like in terms of the US's action in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya. What happened? Where are they now? Is there peace in those countries? No. So in this kind of war, everyone will lose. The countries in the region as well as all over the world. So I really hope our Prime Minister's wise words are followed and the war comes to an end quickly.
Also, today Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri on behalf of Government of India signed the condolence book at the Embassy of Iran. How is New Delhi positioning itself in the current situation?
This is the very right thing to do. And we just mentioned Iran and India have, I would say, civilizational relations. We have our interests in Iran, and the Chabahar port is the one in which we are deeply involved. So I think it was the right thing for definitely Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri to go and sign the condolence book on behalf of Government of India.
Ambassador Swaminathan, a lot of fake news is circulating, and how does this campaign of misinformation or disinformation play a key role in times of conflict, and how should people consume information at such critical time?
As we all know, during wars and crises, misinformation, disinformation always surge. Conflicts create uncertainty, fear, intense public interest, and these are the conditions in which false information spreads very quickly. What should one do? One has to be, of course, very clear in terms of rely on multiple credible sources. We have to consult established national as well as international news organizations rather than relying on a single social media post. And it is also important, I would say, we have to check the origin of the content. Who published the information? Is the source identifiable and credible? That kind of a confirmation is very important. And also, it is equally important to be very cautious with dramatic visuals. Videos and photos spread so rapidly in this age, and they are often, I would say, misattributed or edited. And all these things, it is very important, one has to be careful. In fact, one more thing I would say, one has to distinguish between reporting and commentary. There are certain facts which are kind of mentioned, but then there is a commentary and that commentary can be colored as well. And also, it's very, very important that we should not amplify air without checking unverified claims. In fact, sharing unconfirmed information can unintentionally spread and amplify misinformation. But maybe if you ask me, I will say, for the best news, listen to Akashvani.
Lastly, Ambassador Swaminathan, I would like to ask you about the United States. The US Senate has backed President Donald Trump's military campaign against Iran, and senators voted to block a bipartisan resolution aiming to stop military campaign without authorization by Congress last night. How is the politics in US unfolding?
The Senate vote which took place last night, supposed to be a bipartisan resolution which was kind of put forward, I think, by one Republican senator and one Democrat senator. But then the voting was on partisan lines. And as Republicans have majority both in Senate and in Congress. In fact, last night voting, if I remember right, it was 53-47 against the resolution because the resolution was to stop the war. So the Congress vote is going to be soon, I think, perhaps tomorrow, I think. And it will also probably on the same lines because in Congress also the Republicans are in majority. Even if Senate or the Congress say the theoretical thing if they have rejected or accepted the resolution that the war should be stopped, even then President Trump has the veto power to veto it and go ahead. So in any case, I think as you mentioned, Senate has voted for it and Congress is also expected to reject in terms of supporting President Trump. But 6 US military personnel have died. That of course, President Trump in his initial address to US, he mentioned that the country should be prepared for such eventuality. But if more body bags come home, there'll be a major problem. I would say from President Trump's point of view, it will be essential to have an early end to the war. And also, you see, like if the war were to continue, already the oil prices have risen, the gas prices have risen. Even from President Trump's own point of view, from the domestic politics, I'm sure there'll be pressures to have an early end.
In the coming days, we'll keep following the updates from the Iran-Israel conflict. And thank you so much for sparing your valuable time and giving us such deep insights on the subject. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on rising conflict in West Asia and its global implications. The participants were R. Swaminathan, former ambassador, and Diksha Saxena, Akashvani correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani.
Insights.